Dr. James Chen frowned at the readings on his holoscreen for the third time. Something wasn't adding up about his newest patient. Sarah Marshall had been admitted to New Hope Memorial Hospital with what appeared to be a simple case of altitude sickness after a mountain climbing incident, but her vital signs were like nothing he'd ever seen. Her core temperature fluctuated between 94 and 101 degrees seemingly at random. Her blood work showed cellular structures that defied classification. And most intriguingly, there was a faint, almost imperceptible luminescence to her skin that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. "Dr. Chen?" Her voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Is everything all right?" He looked up to find her watching him with those remarkable eyes of hers, eyes that seemed to shift color like an aurora borealis trapped in human irises. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, with high cheekbones, silvery blonde hair, and skin so pale it was almost translucent. "Your test results are unusual," he said carefully. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Sarah nodded, though he noticed a slight tension in her shoulders. "Have you always had this bioluminescent effect to your skin?" Her eyes widened fractionally. "You can see that, yes. Most people probably can't, but I have a rare genetic condition that allows me to see slightly beyond the normal visible spectrum." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her fingers twisting the hospital blanket. "I suppose there's no point hiding it from you then." "Yes, I've always had it. It's hereditary, you could say." James pulled up a chair beside her bed, his curiosity piqued. "And the temperature fluctuations? The unusual blood chemistry, also hereditary?" She smiled faintly. "Though I'm surprised your equipment could detect the differences. Most medical scanning technology isn't calibrated for, well, for people like me, people like you." Sarah's skin luminescence intensified slightly, creating patterns that reminded James of constellations. "My mother was human," she said softly. "My father wasn't." James felt his medical training warring with the impossible implications of what she was saying. "Wasn't human? He was a refugee from a system you'd probably know as Kepler 186. Their ship crashed in the Rockies 30 years ago. My mother was part of the rescue team that found them." Sarah's voice grew distant with memory. "They fell in love, despite everything. I'm the result." James found himself leaning forward, captivated not just by her story but by the way the light played beneath her skin as she spoke. "That's extraordinary. But why are you telling me this? Surely keeping it secret would be safer, because I need help," she admitted. "The altitude sickness wasn't really altitude sickness. Something's happening to me, something my father's people called the awakening. It typically happens around age 30, when our hybrid physiologies finally stabilize. But without guidance from others like me, I'm..." She trailed off as another wave of bioluminescence washed over her skin, this time accompanied by a grimace of pain. James reached for her hand instinctively. The moment their skin touched, he felt a subtle electric current pass between them, and Sarah's luminescence responded by creating intricate patterns around the point of contact. "I'll help you," he heard himself say, even as his rational mind screamed about the impossibility of it all. "Whatever you need." Sarah's fingers tightened around his. "It could be dangerous. If anyone found out, I took an oath to help people in need," James said firmly. It didn't specify which planet they had to be from. That earned him a genuine laugh, and he found himself mesmerized by the way her whole being seemed to light up with the sound. As a doctor, he knew he should be maintaining professional distance, especially with a patient this unique. But there was something about Sarah that called to him on a level beyond the merely clinical. "Thank you," she whispered. Then her expression turned serious again. "But Dr. Chen, James, there's something else you should know. The awakening isn't just a physical transformation. It's also..." Before she could finish, her monitor suddenly spiked. Her skin blazed with light, and James watched in amazement as iridescent patterns began spreading across the ceiling and walls, turning his ordinary hospital room into a cosmic light show. "It's starting," Sarah gasped, her grip on his hand tightening. "Please don't leave." James squeezed her hand reassuringly, even as his scientific mind raced to document every extraordinary detail of what he was witnessing. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised. And as the room filled with impossible light, James Chen realized he was about to embark on the most remarkable medical case, and perhaps the most extraordinary journey, of his life. Over the next few days, James found himself spending every spare moment in Sarah's room, documenting her transformation. The hospital administration had raised eyebrows at his insistence on personally overseeing what appeared to be a simple case, but he'd managed to keep the true nature of her condition hidden by isolating her in a private room and restricting access to her medical files. "Your cellular structure is completely reorganizing itself," he explained one evening, studying the latest scan results. "It's like watching evolution happen in real time." Sarah lay propped up in her bed, her skin emanating a soft glow that seemed to intensify whenever he was near. "My father called it the chrysalis phase. He said it's when our hybrid genetics finally find their balance." James pulled his chair closer, trying to maintain a professional demeanor despite his growing fascination with every aspect of her being. "Can you tell me what you're experiencing? It's like awakening to senses I never knew I had." She closed her eyes, concentrating. "I can feel the electromagnetic fields from the equipment, taste the photons in the air, hear the quantum vibrations of atoms." As if to demonstrate, she lifted her hand, and James watched in amazement as tiny points of light gathered around her fingers, dancing like miniature stars. "Incredible," he breathed, reaching out instinctively to touch the light display. The moment his fingers met hers, the lights swirled around both their hands, creating intricate patterns that pulsed in sync with their heartbeats. "That's new," Sarah whispered, staring at their joined hands. "I've never been able to share the light with anyone before." James knew he should pull away, maintain professional boundaries, but the connection between them felt electric, profound. "Your father's people, what were they like? Explorers? Dreamers? They traveled the stars looking for other civilizations, other forms of life." A sadness crept into her voice. "Most of them died in the crash. The few survivors, including my father, were eventually found by government agencies. I never saw him again after I was 5. Without thinking, James reached up to brush away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. The moment his skin touched her face, her bioluminescence flared, filling the room with aurora-like waves of color. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, withdrawing his hand. "That was unprofessional." "No." Sarah caught his wrist, her touch sending tingles up his arm. "It's comforting. You make the lights dance differently than anyone else ever has." Their eyes met, and James felt something shift between them, something that went beyond doctor and patient, beyond even human and hybrid. In her gaze, he saw entire galaxies swirling, mysteries waiting to be discovered. The moment was broken by a sharp knock at the door. They pulled apart hastily as Dr. Rivera, the hospital administrator, entered. "Dr. Chen," she said, her tone clipped. "A word?" In the hallway, Rivera fixed him with a stern look. "Your patient." There are irregularities in her test results. James kept his expression neutral. "I'm monitoring the situation. Are you? Because I've noticed you spending an unusual amount of time in her room. And there are reports of strange lights coming from under her door at night. Medical equipment," James said smoothly. "We're trying some experimental treatments for her condition." Rivera's eyes narrowed. "What exactly is her condition, Dr. Chen?" "Because I've reviewed her file, and nothing seems to justify this level of personal attention. I assure you, everything is under control. Patient confidentiality prevents me from discussing the details, but this is my hospital, doctor. If there's something I should know, trust me," James said firmly. "I have it handled." Rivera held his gaze for a long moment before nodding curtly. "See that you do. And James? Remember to maintain appropriate boundaries with your patients." After she left, James returned to Sarah's room to find her sitting up in bed, her skin pulsing with anxiety. "They're getting suspicious," she said softly. "Let me worry about that." He checked her latest readings, trying to focus on the medical data rather than the way her presence made him feel. "How's the pain level?" Instead of answering, Sarah reached for his hand again. The moment they touched, images flooded his mind, stars wheeling overhead, distant planets gleaming like jewels, the vast dance of galaxies. What was that? He gasped when the vision faded. Memories. Not mine, my father's people's. They're awakening with everything else. She squeezed his hand. I've never been able to share them before. But with you. James knew he was crossing a line, knew he was risking his career and possibly more, but in that moment, he didn't care. Show me more? Sarah smiled, and the room filled with light once again. The hospital had grown quiet during the night shift when James made his usual rounds to Sarah's room. She was sitting by the window, her silvery hair catching starlight, making her seem to glow even without her bioluminescence. Your readings are stabilizing, he said, trying to maintain a professional tone despite the way his heart raced whenever they were alone. The chrysalis phase seems to be nearing completion. Sarah turned to him, her aurora-like eyes swirling with colors he'd never seen in human irises. I can feel it. Everything is clearer now. Including this. She reached for his hand, and the moment they touched, the room exploded with light. But this time, it was different. The patterns weren't random. They formed images, memories, feelings. James saw himself through her eyes, felt her heart race when he entered the room, experienced the electric thrill that coursed through her whenever they touched. Sarah, he whispered, his professional resolve crumbling. We shouldn't, why not? She stood, closing the distance between them. Because you're my doctor? Because I'm not fully human? Or because you're afraid of what you're feeling? Her skin was glowing brighter now, creating patterns that seemed to reach out toward him like cosmic tendrils. Without conscious thought, James lifted his hand to her cheek. The moment their skin connected, a surge of shared sensation passed between them. He could feel her feelings, and she could feel his. I've never experienced anything like this, she murmured, leaning into his touch. The connection, it's not just physical. My people, we bond on a quantum level. Our energies intertwine. As if to demonstrate, she placed her hand over his heart. Immediately, ribbons of light began dancing between them, creating a luminous cocoon that pulsed in sync with their heartbeats. This is dangerous, James said, even as he drew her closer. If anyone finds out, I know. Sarah whispered against his lips. But some things are worth the risk. When they finally kissed, it was like touching a star. Light exploded around them, and James felt his consciousness expanding, merging with hers. He saw glimpses of distant worlds, felt the pull of alien stars, experienced the vast beauty of space through her hybrid senses. They broke apart at the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the light show quickly fading. But something had fundamentally changed between them. A bond had formed that transcended ordinary human connection. Meet me tomorrow night, Sarah said quickly. There's more I need to show you about what I really am. James knew he should refuse, should maintain professional boundaries, should protect his career. Instead, he found himself nodding, already addicted to the way she made his world explode with light and possibility. As he left her room, trying to compose himself, he realized there was no going back. He was falling in love with a woman who was half alien, and nothing in his medical training had prepared him for that. The next night, James found Sarah in her room surrounded by a constellation of floating lights. Her transformation had progressed further. Her skin now had an almost translucent quality, with star-like points of light moving beneath the surface. Lock the door, she said softly. When he did, she held out her hands to him. I want to show you what I truly am. The moment their hands met, the room dissolved around them. James gasped as he found himself floating in what seemed to be space, though he knew they were still physically in the hospital room. Through their connected consciousness, Sarah shared memories of her father's world, crystal cities floating in purple skies, beings of pure light dancing through quantum fields, and technology that seemed like magic. This is incredible, he breathed, watching as galaxies spun around them in their shared vision. There's more, Sarah whispered. Her body was glowing now, not just with bioluminescence but with an inner light that seemed to reach out to him on a molecular level. My people don't just bond physically. We merge energies, share consciousness, become something greater than ourselves. As she spoke, the lights around them intensified. James felt himself being drawn into her energy field, their auras beginning to merge. The sensation was unlike anything he'd ever experienced, intimate beyond words, yet pure and natural as starlight. I'm probably breaking every medical oath there is, he murmured, pulling her closer. Then break them, she responded, her eyes swirling with cosmic fire. Some rules weren't made for what we are. Their kiss this time was different, deeper, more complete. James felt his consciousness expanding, merging with hers until he couldn't tell where he ended and she began. Through their connection, he experienced the universe as her hybrid nature perceived it, a vast dance of energy and light, everything connected at the quantum level. But their moment of cosmic communion was shattered by an urgent knocking at the door. Dr. Chen? It was Rivera's voice. I know you're in there. Open this door immediately. The starfield vision collapsed, leaving them back in the Stark hospital room. Sarah's skin was still glowing, impossible to hide. James, she whispered urgently. Whatever happens, remember, I can never go back to hiding what I am. Not now. Not after finding you. He squeezed her hand as the knocking grew more insistent. Then we won't hide anymore. The door burst open. Dr. Rivera stopped mid-sentence at the sight before her, Sarah's glowing form, the dancing lights in the air, and James standing protectively between them. But instead of the shock or horror they expected, Rivera's expression softened. So, she said quietly, it's happening again. Again? James asked, still holding Sarah's hand. Rivera closed the door behind her. Your father wasn't the only one who survived that crash, she told Sarah. And your mother wasn't the only human who fell in love with a Starwalker. To their astonishment, Rivera's skin began to shimmer with a familiar luminescence. I've been watching you, protecting you. There are more of us than you know. Sarah's lights pulsed with emotion. You're like me, we're a secret community. Hybrids and the humans who love us. We've been waiting for your awakening. Rivera turned to James. And now it seems we have another human joining our ranks, the hospital. James began. Is a safe haven. Why do you think we have so many experimental wings? Rivera smiled. We help our kind through their transformations. Though I must say, your connection is unusually strong. As if in response, the lights around Sarah and James intensified, their energies intertwining visibly. Come with me, Rivera said. Both of you. There's someone who's been waiting a very long time to see you. They followed her through secret corridors to a hidden section of the hospital. There, in a room filled with starlight, stood a man whose skin shimmered with cosmic fire, Sarah's father. The reunion was beautiful and heartbreaking, their lights merging in patterns of joy and love. James watched, still holding Sarah's hand, as she finally found her place in both worlds. Welcome to the family, Doctor, Sarah's father said, extending a glowing hand. Though I see you're already part of it. James looked at Sarah, seeing their future in her starlit eyes. I wouldn't have it any other way. Later that night, as they stood on the hospital's hidden rooftop garden, watching real stars blend with the lights of their own making, Sarah turned to James. Still glad you broke those medical protocols? She teased. James pulled her close, their auras merging into a miniature galaxy. Some patients are worth breaking every rule for. Above them, the stars twinkled, earthly and alien alike, as two souls from different worlds found their home in each other's light.